Hello everyone and welcome to Beginner's Code. Today we are going to learn how we can use Python and JavaScript to scrape a website and get information from the website in regards to SEO. Okay, so I've created a new folder and I've opened it in my terminal and in Visual Studio Code. First thing that we are going to do is just create a virtual environment, so Python 3-m venv, and we will say my env. So the next thing that we need to do is activate it. So we'll say source my env bin activate. And then now that we've got it active, I'm just going to pip3 install Flask, requests, and bs4. So this project that we are doing is going to involve Beautiful Soup, which is a website scraping module or library. So now what we'll do is create a folder called templates and another one called static. The static is going to hold the styles.css and the template is going to hold the index.html. And then in the root of the SEO scraper folder, we'll create an app.py file. So this will hold the Python that we are going to be running. So now that we have everything installed and it's working, we are now going to get started. So we will import some things from Flask, and it's going to be Flask, render template, request, and JSONify. We are also going to import requests. Make sure that these two are different. Requests has an S, and then request is part of the Flask module. And then from BS4, we are going to install Beautiful Soup. Okay, so now that we have this kind of running, we are going to create a app variable, and this is just going to be assigned the instantiation of Flask with name. And then we'll just say if name is double equal to main, then app.run, and we'll pass in debug, and we'll make that equal to true. Okay, so now we have a boilerplate for our app.py file. We just need to make sure that everything is up and running. So we'll say app.root, and we'll pass in a base root, and we'll say def index, and here we're just going to return render template of index.html. Okay, so now that we have this function in here, we're just going to create a p tag, pass in test, and then we can use Python 3 and run the app, make sure that everything is working correctly. And if we go over to Google Chrome and paste this, we get this test output, which is perfect. Okay, so since this is a web scraping app, this is going to scrape specific websites, and it's going to get the heading one, the meta description, and the page title, which are all extremely useful for an SEO standpoint. But be mindful when you're doing this that web scraping is not strictly the best. A lot of companies will mark you down, and if you are scraping their websites often, you might even get blacklisted. So it's probably not the best way of finding out if they have a heading one, a meta description, and a page title. But for this tutorial, and remember this is only a tutorial, I will be using my own website. So here we will say def, and we're going to create a function for scraping the web page, and it's going to take a URL, and we're going to create a response. So we'll say response is equal to requests, and we are just going to get the URL. So it's going to make a GET request to this specific URL and then pass back a response. So now if the response status code is 200, which means it's a good response, then we will have a soup variable, and that will just be created or instantiate the beautiful soup, and we'll pass in response.content, and then we will use in a string HTML parser. Now there's different things that you can pass in here, HTML, XML, but for now we'll just use HTML. We are going to create 3 different variables, the first one being title, and this is just going to use soup, and then it's just going to get the title. It's going to get the text, and then we are going to strip the text of any white space. So it will just retrieve the title. We are then going to create heading 1, and this will be soup.find, and this will find the heading 1 tag. It will get the text, and we will strip the text. And then after we'll say if soup.find heading 1, otherwise we're just going to return none. And then we're going to say meta description, and we'll say soup.find meta. Now, since there are quite a few different meta tags, we are going to pass an attribute, and this will be a dictionary of name and description. And then we are going to pass in the string of content, and we'll say if soup.find meta, and then the attribute again, so the dictionary of name, description, else none. And if I use Alt-Z, then we can format this a little bit better so that everything runs on to new lines, but this is all the same line. Okay, so now that we have that, we have those 3 variables, and if everything's worked correctly, we're going to return JSONify, and then a dictionary, which will say title, and we'll pass in the title, heading 1, and we'll pass in heading 1, and meta description, and then the meta description variable. So this dictionary will be turned into a JSON object, which will have these 3 different key value pairs. Now we need to handle the else statement for this response. So if it's not a 200, then we will print, and this will say failed to retrieve web page. And then we are just going to return JSONify an error. Sorry, a dictionary that is error, and then failed to retrieve web page. I might make this a lowercase e just for easeability. Okay, so now we have our scrape web page function. We now need to pass it back into this index function. So because we want it to be all in one web page, we don't want to make it go on to another route. We'll use the same route that we have for the index page, and we will say methods, and we'll pass in get, and we will pass in posts. So this will handle both the get and the post requests for any function on this index route. So we'll say if the request.method is double equal to post, we're going to say URL is equal to request.form, and this will be the URL. So that will be a input that has the name of URL. And then we're just going to return scrape web page with the URL that's been passed in. And then we'll say else, and we are rendering the template of index.html. So now we have our app.py. What we'll do is create our index.html, So we will just have a HTML5 boilerplate. We can change the title to say web page information. And then we'll create a div that has a container or a class of container. We'll say heading 1 of web page information and a form that doesn't have an action, but it does have an ID, and the ID will be URL form. We also need to pass in a link to the static file, so that will be URL4 static, and then file name inside single, because the double is breaking. So inside single, we'll say styles.css. And then now we can create the input fields for the form. So we'll have a label, and this will be for URL input, and then enter URL. We'll have an input field, which is type of text, which has an ID URL input so that the label matches up. We'll say name URL, and that will reference this here. So if something is inputted into this URL input field, then it will be passed into that function. We will have a placeholder, which will just say https example.com, and we're going to make the form field required. Now we'll create a button that is input type submit, that just has the text submit. Okay, so now if we come back over to here, we can see that everything is still running. So if we open Chrome and refresh, we now have web page information with a form where we can add in some text. Okay, so now we need a way for all of the content that we get back to be output, and it needs a container or some kind of place for it to sit on the web page. So below the form, we'll create a div that has an ID of web page info. And then here we'll say div page title, and that has a heading 4 that just says page title, and then a p tag. And then still inside the web page info div, we will essentially do the same thing, and it will just be heading 4, which says heading, and a p tag. And then finally div.meta description, and then a heading 4 that just says meta description, and then a p tag. Okay, so now we have everything laid out. We can go back to here and refresh, and this is where we would be seeing it. But for now, let's give it a little bit of styling, just so that it makes it look a little bit more appealing to the eye. So first, we will say body. We'll say font family Arial sans serif, and we'll give it a background color of F7, 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 and then a margin of 0 and padding of 0. We're also going to then target everything, and we will say box sizing border box. So that will make sure that it takes everything into account in terms of the borders. We will use the container. We'll give it a max width of 600 pixels, and we'll say margin 20 pixels to the top and the bottom, and then auto left and right, and that will centralize the container. Give the padding 20 pixels, and then a background color of white, and a border radius, if I can type, of 8 pixels, with a box shadow of 0 pixels, 2 pixels, 5 pixels, and then RGBA, which will be black with an opacity of 0.1. First, we will use the heading one and give it a text line of center, and then a margin bottom of 20 pixels. And we can then start styling the form. So we'll say form, margin bottom, 20 pixels, display flex, justify content center, align items center. Actually, we'll do align items flex start, just so that everything's at the start. Flex direction of column, and we'll give it a gap of 1 rem. Now we can start styling different things. So we'll use the label and we'll say font weight bold, and then input type submit. Sorry, input type text. And here we will say width 100%, padding 10 pixels, font size 16 pixels, border of 1 pixel solid CCC, and then a box sizing of border box. And then we will target the button, so button, type submit. And now we will use 100 pixels in width, padding of 10 pixels, font size of 16 pixels. We'll give it a background color of 4CA50, a color of white, and then we'll say border none, border radius 4 pixels, and cursor pointer. And then finally we will use the web page info, and we'll give it a margin top of 20 pixels. We're then going to target the page title p tag, the page title heading 4, the heading p tag, and the heading 4, the meta description, and the meta description p tag. So another way that we could do this is literally just do heading 4 and p. And since these are the only heading 4 and p tags that we have on this page, it will work fine. But usually that is not the best way to do it, because we would actually have other heading 4 and p tags. So I'll put it back to how it was. And here we're just going to say display none. So this will hide everything if we don't have anything. So this is obviously a reason why it would be best to target each thing individually, because if we just did heading 4 and p and made it all display none, any other p tags on the site would disappear as well. Okay, so now that we have the layout done, kind of, we need to add some styling for if we have a result. So we'll say web page info, and we'll say .active, and then we'll target the heading 4. So this will mean that if the web page ID or web page info ID has a class of active, then the heading 4 will change from display none to display block. It will give it a margin bottom of 5 pixels and font weight of bold. And then we'll say web page info active, and we'll target the p tag. We'll say display block, margin of 0, padding left of 10 pixels. We'll give it a background color of F9, 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 and then a border left of 5 pixels solid, and we'll go for green again. and then a border radius of 4 pixels and a padding of 8 pixels. So now if we head back, we shouldn't see anything. Well, you'll see obviously that changed, but the web page info we shouldn't see. But now if we come to here and we go to web page info and we add attribute, we'll say class active. Then down here we'll have this laid out, so we've got page title with a little green border and some background color. But obviously for the time being, this doesn't actually do anything until we link it up using JavaScript. So now if we head back to our index.html, what we need to do is outside of all of this div, but still in the body, we'll create a script tag, which will be a source. And we're just going to link to jQuery. So we'll say code.jQuery.com/jQuery 3.6.0.min.js. And now if we create another script tag that is just a script tag, doesn't have a source, we can start adding our JavaScript. So what we'll do is create a console log, and we'll just say console log window. Now if we come into the inspector and refresh, we now have our window object. So we know that jQuery is working correctly. So what we'll do is we'll create a document ready function. So once the content has all fully been loaded, then we will only, then the code inside of this document ready will fire. So we are going to target the URL form, which is the form that we made earlier on, and we'll say .submit. So when it's submitted, we're going to create a function that will pass in the event, and then everything inside of this will run. So whenever it's submitted, this code that we are going to write will run. We'll do event.preventDefault, and that will stop the form from submitting. We're going to create a new variable called URL, and that will target the URL input, and we'll just get the value. And then we are going to use a AJAX post request, and we'll say /, we'll pass in URL, so that will be an object of the URL, and we'll say function, and we expect a data to be passed back. So here we will create a heading one, which will be data.h1. So what we should really see is if I console log the data and then come back to here and refresh, if I were to just say beginnerscode.co.uk and submit, if we come here, not found, sorry. Why is that not? Can't even type. No resource with given URL found. It should be. It's definitely a website. 500 internal server error. There should be a meta description on here. Yeah, meta description. Let me try with another website. Oh, it's because I spelled description wrong. Oh, I knew that something was going wrong with meta description. Okay. Okay, so I came back to here and I realized that description was actually spelt wrong. So now if I remove the R and save and come back to Chrome, and now if I take beginner's code, we should see a console log of an object. So now this object, when you open it, you see heading 1, learn to code, meta description, which is the meta description of the page, and then the title, learn to code, beginner's code. If you also come to network and submit, you'll be able to preview it here and see everything as you expect. So now if we come back onto here, go back to the index.html, we can remove the console log of data. Now we know that because there is an object that has heading 1 meta description title, we can go back to here and we can say let heading 1 equals data dot heading 1. We can say let meta equals data dot meta description. Make sure I spell it right. And then we'll say let title equals data dot title. Now here we want to start adjusting the actual layout or the styling of it. And what we'll do is we will look for the web page info. And if it's all successful, we're just going to add a class of active. Now we know that this would be successful because this is run, so the data has been passed back. And then what we'll say is web page info page title and then P, and we will make the text equal to title. Now if I copy and paste that and we change this to meta description, and then we'll pass in meta, and we'll change this to heading, and we'll pass in h1. So now if I save it and come back to Google Chrome and refresh, if I take the URL again and pass it in, submit, we have page title, learn to code, beginner's code. We have the heading, or the heading 1 of learn to code. So we've got learn to code, beginner's code, learn to code as the heading 1, and then meta description, learn to code, kickstart your career, which is in the page source. Hopefully this has helped you grasp how we can use different Python libraries mixed with JavaScript to really enhance how we can retrieve and manipulate data. If you learned something today, please hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to see new videos coming. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.